The forgotten tracks. Mark had always been fascinated by urban exploration. The thrill of uncovering forgotten places, untouched for decades, drove him to risk trespassing into old factories, decrepit houses, and underground tunnels. One evening, while researching online, he stumbled upon a forum thread about an abandoned subway line beneath his city. The old station, reportedly closed after a series of mysterious accidents, seemed like the perfect place to explore. Equipped with his flashlight, camera, and a crowbar, Mark descended into the subway. The air was damp and stale, carrying the scent of rust and decay. As he ventured deeper, the sound of the bustling city above faded, replaced by an oppressive silence. The walls were adorned with graffiti, but some markings caught his eye. They weren't typical tags. They looked like scratches but were too deliberate, forming jagged symbols that made his skin crawl. Mark pressed on, his flashlight revealing remnants of a bygone era. Discarded ticket stubs, rusted turnstiles, and a forgotten vending machine. Then he noticed something odd. The deeper he went, the colder it became. His breath fogged in the air, and faint sounds of metal screeching echoed through the tunnels, though there were no trains running. His footsteps faltered when he spotted an old maintenance room. The door creaked open, revealing a space littered with debris, food wrappers, a broken flashlight, and a journal. The journal's pages were brittle, but the entries were legible. It detailed the experiences of another explorer who had ventured down the same tracks. They described hearing whispers, seeing shadows that didn't belong, and feeling watched. The final entry ended abruptly with the phrase, "They live in the dark. Don't make noise." Mark's heart raced as he reread the last line. Suddenly, the faint sound of footsteps echoed behind him. He froze, his flashlight trembling in his hand. Turning it off, he held his breath, trying to blend into the darkness. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by a guttural growl that sent chills down his spine. He could barely make out a hunched, humanoid figure in the dim light of a distant exit sign. It wasn't human. It moved unnaturally fast, its elongated limbs skittering across the ground like a spider. Panic surged through Mark as he bolted down the tunnel. His heavy breaths echoed, and the creature's guttural growls grew closer. His flashlight flickered as he ran, casting fleeting glimpses of the creature's glowing, predatory eyes. Mark tripped over a loose rail and scrambled to his feet, adrenaline overriding the pain in his ankle. He finally saw the faint glow of the station entrance. With every ounce of strength, he lunged forward, bursting into the cold night air. He collapsed on the sidewalk, gasping for breath. When he looked back, the tunnel was empty, but he could still feel its eyes watching him from the darkness. Mark never returned to the subway, but the experience haunted him. Every night, as he lay in bed, he swore he could hear the distant sound of metal screeching and the faint echo of footsteps. The static calls. Emma had always loved vintage electronics. Her apartment was a shrine to retro technology, from typewriters to rotary phones. So when she found an old tube television at a yard sale, she couldn't resist. The seller, an elderly man, seemed eager to get rid of it. "It's been acting strange," he muttered, but Emma brushed it off as superstition. Once home, Emma set up the TV in her living room. It only displayed static, but she found the crackling noise oddly comforting. That night, as she drifted off to sleep, she woke to the sound of faint voices. Confused, she wandered into the living room to find the TV on, glowing eerily in the dark. The static seemed to pulse, and within the noise, she could hear fragmented sentences. "Help us, don't trust it, and it's watching." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. She turned off the TV and unplugged it, chalking the incident up to exhaustion. But over the next few days, the voices grew louder. The static began to form shapes, faces screaming silently, hands pressed against the screen as if trying to break through. Emma started avoiding the living room, but the TV would turn on by itself, no matter how many times she unplugged it. One evening, determined to end the nightmare, Emma smashed the TV with a hammer. Instead of breaking, it emitted a deafening scream that made her ears ring. The screen cracked, releasing a thick, black mist that filled the room. Emma stumbled out, gasping for air, but the mist seemed to follow her, whispering in voices that didn't belong. From that night on, the voices were everywhere, on her phone, her radio, even in her thoughts. The mist never left, lingering in the corners of her vision, a constant reminder of the static calls she couldn't escape. Emma tried to research the television's origins, finding reports of a man who had built it in the 1960s. He was rumored to dabble in the occult, claiming the television could bridge worlds. The more she learned, the less she slept. Her nights were consumed by whispers and visions of twisted figures clawing their way through static-filled voids. Desperate, Emma sought out an expert in paranormal phenomena. The woman, a medium named Louise, agreed to cleanse her apartment. Louise entered with sage and chance, but the mist reacted violently. It swirled into a vortex, pulling Louise toward the shattered TV. She screamed, her body dissolving into the mist as it consumed her. Emma fled, abandoning her apartment. But the mist wasn't confined to the TV anymore. It followed her wherever she went, its whispers growing louder, its presence more oppressive. Emma realized too late that some things, once invited in, can never be banished. The Crimson Trail. Jake and his friends had heard the rumors about the Crimson Path, a secluded trail deep in the woods that was said to be cursed. Locals spoke of hikers who entered but never returned, but Jake dismissed the stories as campfire tales. On a cloudy afternoon, they decided to hike the trail, eager for adventure. The path was overgrown, and the air felt heavy with moisture. Strange symbols were carved into the trees, each one more grotesque than the last. At first, they joked about the markings, but as they ventured deeper, the laughter faded. The group soon noticed a trail of blood winding through the path. At first, it was just small drops, but it became thicker, forming a continuous line that led deeper into the woods. The smell of iron filled the air, and unease settled over them. Night fell quickly, and with it came an oppressive silence. Long, piercing screams began echoing through the forest. Shadows flitted between the trees, and the symbols seemed to shift when they weren't looking. One by one, Jake's friends disappeared, their screams cutting off abruptly. Jake ran blindly through the woods, the blood trail guiding him. The screams seemed to follow, each one closer than the last. His flashlight flickered, and the shadows seemed to take form, twisted humanoid shapes with eyes that glowed faintly red. He stumbled upon a clearing, where a massive tree stood at its center. The blood trail led straight to its roots, which writhed as if alive. Faces appeared in the bark, faces of his friends, their mouths open in silent screams. The ground beneath him began to quake, and the tree's roots lashed out, pulling him toward the trunk. In a final burst of adrenaline, Jake broke free and sprinted through the woods. The shadows gave chase, their guttural growls echoing in his ears. When he finally stumbled onto the main road, he collapsed in relief as a passing car stopped to help. But as he looked back, he saw the shadows lingering at the edge of the forest, watching. Jake never spoke of what happened in the woods, but he knew the Crimson Path wasn't done with him. The marks on his arms, the same grotesque symbols from the trees, were a constant reminder. The unseen passenger. Claire was driving home late at night when she saw a hitchhiker standing by the side of the road. Against her better judgment, she stopped to offer a ride. The man, wearing a tattered jacket and wide-brimmed hat, climbed into the back seat without a word. As she drove, Claire tried to make small talk, but the man remained silent. The air in the car grew colder, and her breath fogged the windshield. When she glanced in the rearview mirror, the man wasn't there. Panic set in, but before she could pull over, a raspy voice whispered from the back seat, "Keep driving." Claire's hands gripped the wheel as the radio flickered on, playing an old, static-filled song. The lyrics seemed to change, warning her to never stop. Her surroundings grew unfamiliar. The road stretched endlessly, the trees on either side blending into a blur. Claire's phone had no signal, and the car's clock seemed frozen. Time felt distorted, the drive stretching into hours with no end in sight. She tried to stop the car, but the brakes wouldn't respond. The hitchhiker reappeared in the rearview mirror, his glowing eyes locking onto hers. "You shouldn't have stopped," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. The car began to fill with a choking fog. Claire coughed, her vision blurring as the hitchhiker's figure dissolved into the mist. Just when she thought she would pass out, the fog cleared, and she found herself parked in front of her house. Shaken, Claire stumbled inside. But the nightmare wasn't over. Every night, her car's engine would start on its own, the headlights illuminating the dark street. And in her dreams, the hitchhiker waited, his glowing eyes a constant reminder of her mistake. Claire knew she had brought something back with her that night, something that would never let her go.